Yeah, we normally record. Did you
Yeah.
agree with Sarah? Then we'd record. I think we normally
Yeah,
record.
I think we probably just need to tell people as part of
Yeah,
your
I will.
introductory
Yeah, yeah.
comments.
And I think we can see as people are joining the part, because we've set this up as a webinar rather than a meeting.
Yeah, I can see the totalizer going
Yeah,
up as
it
we
is going
speak.
up, but the participants don't see anybody other than us.
Right. Okay. But can they hear us now? Or
Oh yeah, yeah, they can.
yeah.
Everybody can. I mean,
Excellent.
for those of you who've joined the Social Value Engine webinar, well, you're very welcome. We're just seeing the total tick up in our webinar session. So normally we give it a minute or so, and then we'll start, so as not to delay those who've joined already. Great. Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Institute of Economic Development's podcast this afternoon on the Social Value Engine. So we're really delighted to be joined by Ivan Annibal from Regeneration. Ivan's been a long-time friend of the IED, also a previous board member and involved in the Education Trust of the IED. So very pleased to have Ivan along. And also Claire Watts from East Riding Council. East Riding are an organisational member of the IED. So it's great to have two friendly faces on the call this afternoon. What's going to happen this afternoon is I'm going to hand over shortly to our speakers. Ivan is going to kick us off, followed by Claire. I'm sure they'll explain that fully when they get going. But I'm Nigel Wilcock. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Economic Development, and I just wanted to take this moment just to say, just read out a few notices, if that's okay, before we get going, 30 seconds or so. So just for those of you who aren't going to conference or the awards dinner, you can still book for either, but I think the booking site on the website is now closed. It's happening next Tuesday. It's happening in Birmingham. If anybody's desperate to go, then you can still email us and we can get you in. I don't think you can use the portal anymore. It's closed. It's very well attended. We're really looking forward to it. Then to flag that we're about to finish. We've got about 3 courses left for those of you who are doing the Institute's certificate in economic development and the advanced certificate in economic development, which means that either you or colleagues who want to sign up for next year's structured program can also get in touch now. So we'd be very keen to, we're very pleased to see people joining next year's cohort. We've had a successful year this year, and we've got plenty signed up for next year too. So it will be running as it's described on the website. And then finally, do keep an eye out for these sorts of sessions. This year's been a celebratory year, 40 years of the IED. So we've had a slightly different year with various events going on, but next year we'll return to a more structured program of various free afternoon webinars, of which this is the sort of type that you'll see in the future. I'm very pleased to say that this might very well be the best attended afternoon webinar that we've run, which is great. But that's enough from me. That's our notices. Nice to see you all, and I'll hand over to Ivan to take this away.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Claire, my partner in crime, and I are absolutely thrilled to have garnered as much interest as this about social value. 97 of you counting at the moment. Hopefully we might even get over the 100. Claire and I have worked actively together around social value for over 10 years. And as Nigel said, I have a long-term history of involvement with the Institute of Economic Development. I was looking at the original joining certificate I got the other day, and it goes back to 1991. So that's why I've got a white beard, for any of you who might have wondered. I hope I've still got some life in the old dog yet, rather than being just very very venerable. But you know, you'll have to make your own judgment when we get to the end of all of this. Talking of dogs, Mrs. A is out, and I've got 3 dogs, so there may be just the slight bark in the background. But if you could just bear with me in relation to that, it'll just add a bit of spice to the presentation. They are all on a warning that if they make too much noise, it's a serious issue and they might not get a walk. So anyway, just by way of a bit of additional background, what we're going to do is run this as a 2-parter. So I'm going to kick off in a few minutes and share my screen and take you through some slides that cover the background to social value and talk a bit about the social value engine and what it does. We're then going to have questions, and if people can raise questions as we go through and put them in the chat, because there are a lot of people here today. I've got 2 eager beaver colleagues on the call who will harvest them. And then when we get to the end of the first session, they will chip in with the most pertinent questions that have arisen, and we'll seek Claire and I to answer those. I may well ask people to chip in who've raised those questions, depending on how clear the question is. Then we'll have a short break, 5 or 10 minutes max, and then we'll come back, and then it'll be over to Claire, and Claire will talk in very applied terms about the experience of social value in East Riding. And I'm sure she'll throw in a wider vista, because she does paint on a broader canvas than just East Riding. But and that will be an opportunity to really understand, you know, via a deep dive, how social value is looked at in the context of not just a local authority, but the ecosystem that East Riding has developed around the whole process. And what we hope is that, particularly for local authority IED followers who've joined the call, that will be interesting. But because it is an ecosystem, there'll be an opportunity, I think, to get lots of insights from other players from different backgrounds, from the private sector and the voluntary and community sector on the call as well. So that's the process. It should take about a couple of hours, but we'll go at a gentle pace. If we get to the situation where we finish more rapidly than that, if you're all shrinking violets and nobody asks any questions, or we motor through it a bit more quickly than we'd anticipated, then we'll give you a bit of time back at the end. But of course, you're in control of your own destiny in a situation like this, because you can come and go as you please. Hopefully you won't all go before we've started, but we'll just see where we get to. We are going to make the slides available at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to benefit from those. And there is some material on the slides by way of references and things that I hope some of you will find useful. But just before I start grappling with the technology and set up the screen share, I don't know, Claire, if there's any just brief introductory comments you'd like to make before I kind of launch into the first half.
No, I think I'm just delighted to see so many people with us. That's really exciting that people have got that interest. I think just to say as well, if anyone's on their way to conference next Tuesday, I'll certainly be around all day and all evening, and Ivan's around in the afternoon, I think. So if you want to catch either of us there, we'd be delighted to chat.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Claire. Right, so I'm now going to share my screen. Can I just check, Claire, that you can see that? Yep. Okay. And I'm now going to go into the share the actual presentation itself. So
Yeah, we've got that.
as I do say, I feel a bit like I'm flying blind because I can't see anybody. I could see there were 104 people on the call just before we started this bit of it. So that's great. And what I'm intending to do is to talk through this, and I would really encourage you to pop questions into the chat so that we've got some stuff to talk about when I've run through the first half of today. And the other thing is that in our experience, social value, because it's all about context, is rooted in networking. So if as many of you as would like could also put your contact details if you want to connect up with other people on the call and more widely into the chat, that would be great. Please don't feel obliged to do that. I know some people don't necessarily want to do that, but just if you were feeling friendly, that would be a nice thing to do, I think. So the first slide, social value presentation, a pragmatic journey. Now I've chosen, and I've talked to Claire about this and she agrees, you'll be pleased to hear, I've chosen that term very deliberately because social value has been around a long time. It's been around as a concept since we sort of crawled out of the sea and began walking on land. But in terms of the policy framework we operate in, it goes back to 2012 in England. And the way it's gained traction and developed a huge constituency of different levels of interest. Yes,
Ivan,
Nigel.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. So this is just sort of an announcement. We had a hand up from a participant. Ivan won't be able to see hands up, and we've not allowed sort of dialogue on that part of the call. So if you can put any questions or aspects in the chat, that would be great. And we'll get to them when Ivan's finished his presentation. So yeah, sorry, Ivan.
Oh no, thanks, Nigel. That's relief. I thought you were going to say that something strange was happening in the background.
No technical issues. I'll go again.
That's good. Excellent. Well, we'll push on. So yeah, we call this a pragmatic journey because our experience is that over the last decade, there's been a real ramping up of interest in social value, but it hasn't been a uniform process. Different people are involved in thinking about social value at different levels of intensity and in different ways. And so one of the things that we have really thought hard about in the way that we provide social value services and the way that we network with people around social value is just to be aware that there is a journey element in terms of people understanding and engaging with social value, and not everybody's in the same place. What we have found is also that pragmatism is now seeping through much more in the way that social value is thought of in terms of public policy. So there are some areas now around things like procurement and construction where social value assessments are almost the norm in the way that people think about interacting. There are other areas where around things like corporate social responsibility, there's been quite a bit of impact washing and sort of relatively thin practice. And then there are other areas where people are only just starting to get to grips with the concept. So there's a real, for want of a metaphor, curate's egg at the moment in terms of social value. But I think the general direction of travel is that people are starting to latch on to the fact now that it is a really important aspect of how we work together, how we understand, and most importantly, how we measure impact in the context of what we do. So I always like to start with a definition, and there is an element to which social value could be perceived as being many different things to many different people, and a term that is easily bandied around but without people fully understanding what it means, or with people having different understandings of the same words. So I always suggest that when we're trying to get to the nub of how we would define social value, that the good old British Standards Institute is a very powerful starting place. And this second paragraph on this slide, which says social value is the result and purpose of sustainability, and sustainability concerns the achievement of optimal societal well-being over the short and longer term, including future generations, is really important. And future generations is an interesting term to play with, because if there's anybody on the call from Wales, and I'm sure there are a lot of other people who are aware of the legislation, that piece of legislation that was developed a few years ago around the well-being of future generations by the Welsh Assembly government is a really important keystone in the context of that territorial geography, at least in terms of thinking about social value and understanding its importance. That legislation isn't just about social value, but it speaks really very deeply to some of the things that we think are important from a social value perspective. So I want to come on and just talk about the principles of social value. There are 8 of these principles, and depending on where you are in terms of your interest in and engagement with social value, you might do these to either a lesser or a greater level of intensity. But we feel, and these have been through the fiery furnace of the work that Social Value UK and Social Value International has done across a very wide community, not just in the UK, but across 44 different countries that are members of Social Value International, that these are really very important, and they just sit there as terms, but if you're going to do them properly, there's quite a lot of effort and commitment that goes into making each of these things real. So involving stakeholders can take a number of different forms, but really, if there is going to be a significant ability to demonstrate and even interpret social value, then the people that are at the heart of the theme we're measuring the impact around need to be involved in it. Language that they understand and relates to them needs to be used, and the process needs to be accountable to them. And we'll come on through Claire in part 2 to give you some examples of how that's been done in East Riding of Yorkshire. But there'll be quite a few people on this call who've been involved in this first fundamental principle. So you'll have your views, and you might want to share some of them in the chat. The second thing is about understanding change. Now, that sounds very throwaway, doesn't it? But actually, thinking carefully, particularly about this term of causality, is really important, because we can be a bit like a magpie when we're thinking about social value. We can identify financial proxies that give a value to an outcome that we're wanting to measure, and we can almost see those things as an end in themselves, rather than just as a means of ascribing a value to something. And if we don't think hard about the rationale for the causality that justifies us choosing those measures, and thinking about the extent to which those measures have actually been delivered and applied to the analysis we're doing, then, to quote my great friend Connor, who's on this call from his Northern Ireland background, we're catching ourselves on. So we need to be very careful that we don't just rush into grabbing some measures, slapping them into a spreadsheet and thinking job done. And that really then speaks to the third principle, which is about only including what is material. So there are lots of interesting things that we might think are important, but we need to really understand the key things that underpin the change, because sometimes at the other end of the spectrum from doing this in a very loose way, some people really want to get right down into the detail, and there are limits to the benefit of going right down into super fine-grained detail with this if we're going to do something which is meaningful and can be understood by people from the outside as well as people who are involved at the heart of it. And also, when you actually look at the results you've generated, if you're using different methodologies, and we'll come on and talk about that, how the engine does it, but there are lots of different ways of doing it. When you do your sensitivity test, which is to check the relative importance of each different thing in terms of the value and how it affects the total social value, if you've included lots of small but not important things, then it will skew your results. And then we move on to 4, which is the biggest challenge. And this is the thing that has got social value in some quarters a bad name, which is don't overclaim. There are a whole raft of people who don't like social value analysis because there's been a tradition of people seeking to get to very large social return on investment ratios and things, just to really try and demonstrate that what they've done is of whopping huge and very great significance. And it might be to them, but if we're going to have the discipline of actually following the principles of social value and actually using different methodologies to value what we've done in a credible way, this is the biggest thing we must avoid. One of the little wrinkles we have in the social value engine is we have a series of drop downs where people can choose outcomes that best reflect what they've done, but the engine won't tell you the value of those outcomes until you've decided which ones to choose, because we found early on that if we give people a list and we actually ascribed a value to each of those, they always, no surprise in this I guess, went for the highest value. So that don't overclaim thing is a responsibility. It's not just a responsibility to make sure people take seriously what you've achieved. It's a responsibility to other people that are doing social value analysis, because there has been a process early in the life of social value where that overclaiming has given it a bit of a bad press amongst certain people. The 5th principle, value what matters, is really quite important in terms of making sure that this is a tight fit to the impact that you're measuring. And I think this is where stakeholders and understanding change also play in, because if you identify a number of things that seem relevant, but when you stand back actually don't pass the test of triangulation with stakeholders, then you shouldn't really include them. Being transparent is really important, and we deal with a number of social value practitioners who are somewhat reluctant to share the source of the valuations that they've undertaken. There are others who are super transparent, but I think unless you can provide a hyperlink and a rationale and a source for the value you've ascribed to something, and understand it, not just provide that link, but understand it, then your analysis is on shaky ground. And that's where the next of these key principles comes in, which is about verifying the result. Because if you're really going to test the veracity of what you've done by opening it up to third parties, then you need to have been through the preceding 6 principles I've talked about. If you don't do that, it'll be very difficult for you to have a credible result that arises from the work you've done. And then the final one, and this is a new one recently introduced, be responsive. This is about not just doing social value analysis, working out the impact you've had in the context of social value for its own sake, but actually seeing it as something which then drives action, which is an imperative to do something. And if you're responsive in the context of your work and your analysis, that won't only mean that you've got something practical and deliverable out of it, but it will also mean that the other people on the journey have all also got a validation and a justification for the way you've involved them. Because what we don't want to do when we're doing social value is do it to people. It's an interactive process, and therefore we need to involve people. Now I'm going to come on in a few minutes to talk about coming back to that pragmatic approach, because I can sense, even though I can't see you, I've been around long enough to know that some of you will be thinking, well, this is fabulous, but if it's going to take me forever to do every single social value analysis I might want to do that underpins the way I might want to bid for tenders or the way I might want to actually deliver projects. It's going to take me too long, and it's going to be a huge bureaucratic process. So what I would say is that whilst these principles are really important, I'm not going to talk about shortcuts, but there are some ways of embedding and thinking and acting that mean that you can actually assess and operate around the principles of social value without it either costing you an arm and a leg in terms of time or slowing you down. But I'll come on and cover that in a few minutes. So if we then move on to the social value UK landscape, virtually everywhere now does recognise the importance of social value. So I've already trialled the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, and actually in 2023, this year, there's been also a new Social Partnership and Procurement Act which has come out, and both those factors plus the 2012 Public Service Social Value Act put an emphasis on the importance of social value assessment, particularly if you're spending public money in Wales. There are also some public policy notices that are regularly released that update that technical side of things at an England level. And in England, the keystone is still the Public Services Social Value Act 2012, but there's been a lot of additional content that's been developed and put in place arising from that, and that's over a decade ago now. In Scotland, you've got the Procurement Reform Act of 2014, and in Northern Ireland, there is a serious commitment to putting social value as a formal statutory responsibility on the statute book once a new functioning administration is in place. So there is a commitment across all 4 UK jurisdictions to social value, and then that trickles down. So most of you might be either here from a local authority and involved in procurement, you might be a supplier to local authorities as a business, you might be involved with the whole public sector agenda in terms of funding as a voluntary and community agency. All of you, one way or another, will have your lives touched in the way you deliver your services by social value as a concept. And what we do with the social value engine, and we think it's really important, is we provide a tool which can help you to measure the social value you've delivered, but we also concentrate on how your impact then relates to the wider community you're working in. And so you'll see on the far right of this slide that we've got the Scottish National Performance Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the social value engine and the approach we take to social value analysis seeks to align each of the outcomes that the people who use our tools identify to frameworks, so that you don't just get a relatively abstract sense of a gross social value and a sense of the social return on investment you've achieved, but you can also then root that in a framework. So you can say, for example, this particular project has delivered 12 outcomes, and each of those ties back to one of the different domains within the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Scottish National Performance Framework, or the Bristol Accord, which is another framework we like, and that enables us to actually talk about the wider impact it's had, coming back to my BSI definition at the start on the sustainability of a place. And we think that's really important when you're working with stakeholders. So we've a lot of people in local authorities who use the social value engine, who want to have a dialogue with their councillors, their members, about what's been achieved in the context of their geographies. and in Barnsley and Leeds, in Barnsley there are area alliances of groups of councillors. We've worked actively with them to look at the impact of different projects in their constituent areas. And in Leeds, we've been working very actively on a dashboard that enables the City Council to demonstrate across the totality of its geography where it's had a real impact. And I think that's quite important, because it means people can get to grips with what we're talking about in a much more meaningful way. So I'm not going to linger on this slide, and you'll see why, because it's a list of references. The key issue in relation to this slide is that it does provide some really useful links to different aspects of the way that social value is arranged and embedded within the environment we operate in. Particularly important, this slide, for public sector players. And you'll see at the very bottom there, I've updated it to put in that latest Social Partnership and Procurement Act hyperlink from Wales. But it's really important, because what it really does more than anything else is it gives an opportunity for you to check these things out. And the spine of this web of hyperlinks and policy references is HM Treasury Green Book. A number of you will be smirking. I can almost see you now, because I know some of you, as I mentioned the Green Book, because you'll have been living with it for a long time. But you'll see next time you open it, when you can't sleep, that chapter 5 sets out a whole raft of information now about social value. And that's been immensely helpful to us, because when we've been trying to convince the naysayers about the efficacy and value of doing this, we've been able to say, it's not just bearded people like me thinking this is a good idea, but actually central government has recognised the importance of it in the way that we monitor and evaluate things. And if you have a look at chapter 5 of the aforesaid book, which is, in inverted commas, the key book, you'll be able to see where it's referenced. So once you get the slides through, this is just a handy source of information to navigate your way around some of the key things that set the context for social value. I really wanted to talk to you about the point I made when I started this discussion in terms of different people being at different stages, because I think there is a danger that those people like me who live and breathe social value can seem a bit purist and judgmental of people who have different encounters with it and want to be involved for different but equally valid reasons. And I've increasingly come to see this as a continuum, and increasingly thought, well, it's not up to me to judge whether people should be, down at the bottom right, really embedded in it, or up at the top left, sort of finding it a necessary evil. So what we've tried to do is to have a broad sense of a social value community, and in the way that we provide the social value engine, to provide a tool and an approach that can accommodate all these different views. But it's worth me just talking you through these different aspects of social value, because in terms of the continuum, it will give you a flavour, I think, for where the current notion of social value is. So in the first left-hand column, we've got the reasons. This is Ivan's judgment of the reasons why people want to be involved in social value, and there's a list there of some of the things they say. So people will say it's a necessary evil, and they feel they've got no choice but to get involved in it, but they don't really understand it, and they're not really very interested in it because they're trying to get on with their life anyway. And in the way that then translates itself in terms of what they'd like from a tool, in our case the social value engine that enables them to engage in it, is that they quite often want something very simple, a sort of point and press approach, and that's based around features which are to do with financial proxies arranged in drop-down lists, which are really easy to pre-select from. And quite often when we have a discussion with that category of people, they'll say to us, well, can you do it for us? Rather than us sort of get our hands too dirty with this because we're busy enough as it is, can we give you some money and leave you to get on and do the social value assessment for us, but use this tool you've got because it's accredited and people talk about it in positive terms. The second category of people are interested, and I'll be interested when I finish going through my spiel to get views as to whether there are other categories of people over and above the ones I've caricatured or characterised here. But for me, the second category of people are those people who think, well, this will help us win business, so we've got to engage with it, but we want something super simple, and we want something that's transactional. We want to understand social value not as a series of interrelations that we can value and that's able to really help us maximize our impact. We want a list of transactional measures, and we really want you to tell us what to do. So we will buy a license for your tool, but really we'd like you to be a backseat driver in relation to it. We get a third category of people who I think have started to catch on to some of the wider potential of social value, and they'll say, we want some form of assessing social value because it'll help us spend and deliver more effectively. And we want something which is functional, not too complicated, but we want a wide list of financial measures, and we want the ability to make some judgments about the context we're operating in. And we find that quickly those sort of people get to a position where they can start to get on with it, but they'll say, is it okay if we sometimes just ask you to give us some insights based on what we've found, just to check we're on the right track? We've then got a fourth category of users who take the view that social value and measuring impact in that broader sense will help them to better understand and manage their actions, and they want something interactive, by which I mean something that doesn't just measure what they've historically done, but which they can use for forecasting and planning, and which they can actually share and use with some of the other organisations that they work with. And what they want from a features perspective is a tool that's got a wide list of measures they can engage with, but also which gives them the scope to consider and adjust them in relation to those key things that I talked to you about when I walked you through the principles of social value, which are to do with context and causality. And we find with those people, they often want a very light touch approach, and they just want to raise interesting questions with us. And it's starting, the more you get down this list, to be more of a delight to work with these people. Well, for me, I don't know what they'd say about the experience of working with me, but for me, it gets more engaging and exciting the further you go down the list. And then we come to the bottom bit, and this is where people want to be involved because they can see that they're in an ecosystem of mutual understanding and respect and working together. And they want something quite holistic, and that quite often involves, I should say an rather than a, but an adjustable list of financial proxies, but which underpins a dialogue, and which is democratized in a kind of co-design and co-measurement way, the way that they work with their peers and colleagues. And where we're working with people who are using tools for that purpose, is that they quite often provocatively come back and challenge us. And sometimes we refine what we've done and enhance the approach we're taking through that dialogue. All those things are equally good. So if you're somebody who's very much focused from a commercial or a procurement perspective on wanting something very simple, we can do that with you. If you're somebody who's a real sort of dyed-in-the-wool enthusiast, we can work with you at that end of the continuum. But from our point of view, the beauty of being able to accommodate all those different categories of players is that we can build a community of people who can actually interpret social value in a way that's appropriate to them. That's not to say the principles underpinning social value should be compromised, but we're pragmatic, we're not purist, and we do want to engage as many people in getting their hands dirty. And of course, there is a process whereby you could start in the top left corner and end up in the bottom right hand corner of this grid, but if you don't, then that's fine by us. The key thing is that people just do start to engage with the concept, and hopefully not just because they feel that they've got to. So to come on to the social value engine itself, which is the tool that we've developed and we use, and which should any of you want to get access to, there is a cost to using it. It's not expensive because we've gone for a high adoption strategy. You can talk to us about. There are a number of key features I just wanted to make you aware of. So the first thing is that it's an online tool which systemizes the process of measuring social value. And you'll have seen as we've gone through these slides, there's that big gold tick on the right-hand side. And we're very proud of that because that was awarded to us through a process of accreditation. So Social Value International and Social Value UK, both based in Liverpool, are really the go-to organisations that oversee social value as a discipline on a global basis. And they run an accreditation process. And we're the only UK tool that is formally accredited through that process. That's not to say that there aren't lots of other good UK-based tools out there, because there are, but they've not all chosen to go through this formal accreditation process. There are tools from other settings, particularly North America, Australasia, and Europe, which are also accredited. But we would argue that context is really important. So actually having a tool that's based in the UK and focuses on the UK, if you're going to measure social value in a systemized way, is probably the best option for you. But I would say that, wouldn't I? But our tool as well is UK based. So we've got a team of people. Claire and I are in the east of the country, in Lincoln and Beverley, but we've got a team in Edinburgh and a team in Northern Ireland as well, and two very strong associates in Wales. So from day one, we've wanted to cover the whole of the UK as a geography, and we do hope that if any of you would like to talk to us more about how our approach works, there is somebody within your own geographical designation who can talk to you. And we have a series of financial proxies, which are the things the engine uses to ascribe a value, which are not just generic. They are based on research that we've done in each of those different territorial jurisdictions, and there are over 400 of them. Now, ultimately, you could have as many as you like, but they have to be meaningful and they have to have a clear source. And so we've lighted upon 400 plus, but it's a base of 400 financial proxies that you can use to ascribe a value to an impact that you've had. At the moment, we've got over 100 organisations who use the engine. We have more accreting to us on a regular basis, because I think as social values matured as a concept, the breadth of our pragmatic approach, from the necessary evil down to the aficionado, has meant that more people have felt more comfortable getting involved with us than some of those more narrowly focused tools that are out there. But that's not to criticise anybody else. Different tools suit different types of user. We have 100 organisations currently involved, and we have these links, as I've said, to internationally recognised outcome frameworks, and the capacity for you to have your own frameworks if you want to, your own business or charity or local authority public body frameworks embedded in the engine, which we do for you at no additional cost, and then you can tag your outcomes against those. And that's quite an important process, being able to do that, because again, if you can contextualize what you've done to your organization, that makes a big difference. But we find, notwithstanding that the vast majority of our users do really like particularly the sustainable development goals, because they're almost like a common currency, and everybody can really use that as a framework to interpret their impact. Just to talk to you a little bit more about the social value engine features, because I've talked in quite broad terms about social value, how you define it, how you do it as a concept, and some of the key principles and legislation around it. But I just wanted to use this slide as a series of prompts to talk you through how we would normally work with people via the social value engine. So what we'd normally do is begin with a process of describing the actions that you've undertaken in the form of a project or a program, or you're planning to undertake, because you can use the engine to forecast as well as to evaluate, to achieve a particular range of things. And you don't have to, but we normally encourage people to think those through in the context of a theory of change. Now, there's a whole separate session that could be delivered on theory of change. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go into lots of detail around that now, but it's basically just a simple, when it's done well, framework. And what happens when you work through a theory of change is it enables you to identify the outcomes that you're seeking to deliver, and it's a way of mapping the causality that you're going to use to justify what you've done. So you do that before you start using the engine directly, and there are some templates which are in the public domain that we provide access to that would enable you to do that in a very straightforward way. There's absolutely nothing to be frightened of in developing a theory of change, and lots of people do it. If you're working on a procurement, i.e. you're bidding for something, or if you're involved in a program, i.e. there are a number of different projects, you don't have to do a theory of change every single time. But if you do that first level of conceptual thinking, it will just set you up with a sheet anchor to underpin what you subsequently do. So the second thing you do, once you've identified through the theory of change the outcomes that you believe you're going to deliver, is you set up your stakeholders. And there's a facility in the engine to identify who your stakeholders are and to be able to link each of the different activities and outcomes that you're undertaking to those stakeholders. And that's important because it comes back to those principles I explained to you at the beginning, that you need to involve stakeholders in interpreting what you're doing. The third stage is to think through the most appropriate financial proxies that you can ascribe to the outcomes that you feel you will achieve, or if you're doing it as an evaluation rather than a forecast, you have achieved. And that list of 400 that I've mentioned can be chosen using a predictive text facility in the engine. So once you've identified the most important financial proxies to relate to your outcomes, you can actually tag those and put them into the calculation process. Now, nothing happens for free. Volunteers aren't free, and in-kind costs are very important. So you need to, in addition to choosing your outcomes and describing them, you need to understand, describe and attribute your costs. And again, the engine helps you to do that. And then for each of the, and that should say outcomes rather than outputs. Sorry, my mistake in just typing this slightly quickly. For each of your outcomes, you link it to a framework. So you choose as part and parcel of your use of the engine whether you want to use the Sustainable Development Goals, your own framework in terms of your own organisation, the Bristol Accord, and you're not tied into that. So if you want to go back once you've done an analysis and say, well, what does this tell me in terms of the Scottish National Performance Framework or whatever, you can toggle. There's a simple drop down and you can toggle. If you're doing procurement, or if you're going to monitor, if you've done a forecast, how people have got on, we're just concluding a new piece of functionality that will enable you to set up a hyperlink you can send to your suppliers or partners. They don't have to understand the functionality of the engine. It will just give them 3 or 4 drop downs that they can update on a regular basis, a quarterly basis or a 6-monthly basis, or if you're super keen, a weekly basis. When they just complete the key bits of information in that, it will automatically update the engine. So you can actually work with your peers or your suppliers to get the reporting done. And that's quite powerful, because one of the things I know has been a big issue with public sector bodies is being able to monitor the social value impact they've achieved when they've awarded a contract to a supplier, but secondly, just the hard work in entering it. So this is something that one or two different tools provide, but we think it's really important. What that enables you to do is once you put all that information in and press the button, is to generate real-time reports showing impact, and also at the end of a particular project showing the overall impact. And there is a facility within the engine called the program facility that enables you to look at how you can look over a series of different projects or programs and their collective impact. And we do have a facility that enables you, because visualization is very important, particularly in terms of some of the constituencies you might be working with, to show your impact in terms of impact cards, which traditionally are, when we used to meet a lot more face-to-face, we used to give them to people. They're double-sided A5, but they can be done as a PDF as well. And we've got an increasing demand for dashboards, which actually show the distribution, which are clickable and searchable, and show the distribution of impact over different geographies and themes, and in some cases council departments. And again, we've got a tried and tested way of doing that. And then the final thing to say in relation to the social value engine is that it's not expensive. I know I'd said that before, but we have a standard tariff if you buy one license per year of £1,250 plus VAT, and for that you get training for as many people within your organisation as are interested, which takes around 2 hours. And then we provide ongoing support through the team we've got as you use the engine to help you validate the first 2 or 3 times you've used it, and to answer any queries that you've got. And for your first few projects, we can also help you set up things that we call templates, which is where we can identify the core financial proxies that are pertinent to your work, which might be nowhere near 400, might be 20. And once we've got those identified, we can work with you on some protocols that enable you to, in a very pragmatic, coming back to that term, very pragmatic way, to just actually include what's material for you. And that's all predicated on the basis that we believe it's really important to give somebody a fishing rod and not a fish in the context of social value, because if we do that, then people can really engage with it and feel that they own the process. So I'm going to stop the share for a minute now, and hopefully we'll have had at least 1 or 2 questions. I can see there's still 103 people on the call, so I'm pleased that you haven't all gone running off into the distance. And we've got Sean and Connor here, so I don't know if we wanted to just kick off and see what we might chat about. So and perhaps I might invite, because you've had to listen to me for the thick end of 50 minutes, Claire to, because I'm cruel like that, answer the first couple of questions. And if you've got questions that you've not put in the chat yet, just to keep us ticking over, if you could drop anything else in there now, that would be marvellous. So I don't know, Sean or Connor, if you just want to take us through the first 2 or 3 things that are in there and just pose them as questions for us. I'll go on to mute for a second because I think the golden retriever's about to bark.
I'm not sure that Connor and Sean can speak at present. I can see one question at the moment.
Hi Claire, I can see it as well.
Oh yeah, that perfect.
No worries. Yeah, it's just a question. There's only been one question asked really, and it's come from Ian Durston about, are you aware of the Thrive tool, and how does the social value engine tool compare to it?
So I've just been having a quick look because I saw the question arise. I mean, I think the first thing is that the Thrive tool is very much in a context of children and young people, whereas we will look at impacts cradle to grave in effect. So we've got a kind of a wider access there. And fundamentally kind of looking through that, that's more a kind of, looks almost quality assurance-y in terms of how things are done, as opposed to something that kind of tries to follow the social return on investment methodology that we use within the engine to actually ascribe monetized values to things. And I can see a question that's just come through about non-monetized impacts. We work very hard to try and find monetized impacts that can be used. The whole point of the methodology and the fact that you ascribe financial proxies is it doesn't have to be an actual monetized impact. We're not talking about cost savings. We're not talking about kind of financial values. We're talking about an equivalent value. And there's been a lot of research in a lot of areas about kind of putting values on things like happiness and well-being and good mental health and being in a good community and all those kind of things. And we draw heavily on that type of research where people have kind of carried out kind of longitudinal studies that aim to monetize those kind of things, to give people a value that can be used, and to give people the evidence then when people say, well, how can you tell that is the value, that you have an immediate hyperlink to the research that explains the methodology and how people have monetized those impacts. So hopefully after our many moons of kind of pulling this proxy list together, most people would find appropriate proxy measures for the impacts that they're trying to deliver, whether they're obviously monetizable or not. Ivan, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I thought you covered that very well, Claire. Thank you very much. But I would just pick up on, I think there's a couple of other things just popped into the chat whilst you've been talking. And I think Sean has answered the first one, which is that Social Value Engine is available on G-Cloud, and you can read all about what it has to offer there. I think from that point of view, we do have a number of people accessing it. That was that. I notice as well that we've got B making a comment saying that she's a researcher at Henham Strategy. I don't know if I pronounced that right, and works with local authorities to develop economic strategies. And I just wanted to pick up on that because we have had an increasing growth of social value strategies in local government, but also from an economic development perspective. One of the reasons I think the IED is rich pickings for us is that social value, I think, really does speak to the whole world of economic development. And I'm keen that we build this constituency of interest. But both Claire and I are economic development practitioners. And I think in the second half, Claire, and we'll break in a few minutes so people can get a cup of tea, and hopefully most of these people will stay with us. But I think in the second half, you're going to talk partially through the lens of economic development about how you use the engine and what you do, aren't you?
I am, and hopefully that will help the person who says they're new to social value and can we have some examples. I'll have lots of examples in the second half, so I'm going to leave that hanging on to make sure you come back after the tea break.
Oh, and there is also a question I notice about social value impacts that can't be monetized, and how one deals with those. And from my perspective, I've always wanted to see social value not just purely as something that we actually develop via a social return on investment methodology. I think that's helpful because I think it provides scope for interpretation and understanding over and above just having a written narrative. But I absolutely agree there are certain things that make up the way that we interpret and describe social value that aren't straightforwardly capable of being monetized. And we have a lot of free form capacity within the engine to enable you, really arising from your theory of change, as you're logging what you think you're going to achieve and what you'd like to measure, narrative that covers some of those key impacts as well. We also have a facility for you to put your own measures in. I know that's still going to have an element of finance associated with it, but we work with Tim Goodspeed and the people at Social Value International around subjective wellbeing measurement. And again, that could be a whole separate discussion, but there is some help that we've given to a number of our license holders about how to address this issue to make sure that they don't miss those things that don't comfortably align to a financial proxy. So I think probably what we might do now then is ask you all to go off and make a cup of tea, and I hope you don't all disappear, because there you go, David was going to also ask for some examples. So these comments are really helpful because they'll hopefully bring you back in the second half, because you've had my theoretical tool-based discussion, and then Claire will give you some really exciting real applied examples, including things to do with angels and all sorts of interesting stuff. But so if I could suggest we take a quick break now, and it's 3:01 as I look at it. So if people want to come back at 3:10, we'll give you till 11 minutes past, so you've got 10 minutes, which should be long enough to nip to the facilities and make a quick cup of tea, and then we'll kick off again with some real life applied examples that really sort of breathe life into this. So thank you very much for listening in the first half, and you've got the exciting bit to come. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay.
I'm hoping we might have some people back. It's hard to see. Am I okay to crack on, Nigel?
I think so. I mean, I can see that there's 89 people still logged on, so
Excellent.
everything's good from our end. So yeah, go for it, I think.
That sounds good. So crack on. I've taken over the screen sharing of the presentation, and you will see in front of you, hopefully, a very busy slide. These are quite wordy for watching on screen, but hopefully you'll be able to kind of look at them in a great deal more detail later. So we've included all the data. So I'm going to look at 3 examples of where we have embedded the use of social value and the social value engine into economic programs over the past 6 or 7 years, actually. So the first one, our Advantage Coast Community-Led Local Development Programme, was the first time that we used the social value engine and aimed to embed social value into our approach from before we started delivery. So we used it as part of our development of our local development strategy in terms of looking at a forecast of what we thought we might be able to achieve in terms of social value, as well as the normal kind of hard outputs and outcomes that you deliver as part of a European funded programme that people probably are relatively used to. So this was a programme that covered both ESF and ERDF. So we were looking at people and skills and jobs and growth in our kind of most deprived coastal areas of Bridlington and going up into North Yorkshire, Scarborough. So it was a large programme to start with. So we started off with a total package of £12 million of funding. So obviously delivering quite some ambitious outcomes and outputs. And you can see on the right kind of the things that we did. So in hard terms, we kind of delivered the ESIF outputs that were expected in terms of funding projects, signing up participants, supporting them into employment, education or training, helping entrepreneurs and businesses through business support and startup projects, allocated grant funding, attracted match funding, created new jobs. So those are the kind of things you'd expect to do in a program. And then we looked kind of more broadly than that in 2 ways. So one thing is that the whole point of the community-led local development process is that it is itself a kind of a capacity building approach. So the whole program was run using a local action group. So the people who were part of that executive committee were having highly skilled volunteer opportunities, developing their leadership skills, developing their partnership working activity, improving the governance of our local organisations, and so on. You can read through all those kind of outcomes, but that was all about kind of just the way of delivering the program, not about kind of the projects that it funded within it. In itself had a value to it, because those local action group members are still kind of engaged in developing those communities beyond the life of the program. And I can say that now because the program's finished and some of them are still there doing great things. And then the project itself funded 53 projects that, as well as doing the outputs that we were expected to for the program, we identified a number of other things that were of advantage to the beneficiaries and the stakeholders within the program. So it made people more aware of services around them. It gave people a greater sense of belonging in their community. It supported volunteer opportunities. And then most importantly, almost particularly as this was delivering right through the kind of COVID process, it helped people to improve their mental health, it increased confidence and self-esteem, it strengthened business models, those kind of activities that are kind of really kind of strong. So we were measuring right the way through, and we did that by working with each individual project. We had a We had specific team members within the programme team who worked with every project that was funded to help them to identify who their stakeholders were, to look at baselining their activity, to help them to measure throughout the project, to really develop their own knowledge of social value and how they could use it, and to leave them with a legacy of kind of evidence for their own activity that they could then use in future funding bids and develop their future activity. So kind of really kind of helping to build capacity within there. This doesn't want to go. Oh, there we go. So we were using at this point the Bristol Accord to look at characteristics of sustainable places. We still tend to do that. This matching with our place-based programs, it works very well. So that slide is just splitting out all our kind of measurements across those different domains to demonstrate that the program had impact right across those activities. And then this is the slide I like the most. I think we use this approach quite a lot about talking about the difference that we made. So we improve people's life skills, we encourage people to become volunteers, we help people to feel less isolated, we improve mental health, people had more confidence and higher self-esteem and a greater sense of belonging. And I think for me, you know, where you're doing these kind of community-based but economic type projects, if you're not looking at these kind of activities as well as just kind of counting beans in terms of how many people have been on your courses or activities or whatever. And there was a huge range of activity across this programme. So we had projects that were helping people to kind of get into particular careers, so catering, the visitor economy, social care, things that were helping people to start up new businesses, things that were helping people who were the sort of furthest away from the job market, kind of do things, get into volunteering, do stuff. And that was quite difficult during COVID. So a lot of this for a period of the programme kind of came back from those kind of economic outcomes and really focused on people being able to feel that they were able to kind of survive and thrive rather than real kind of, you know, we weren't counting jobs at that point. We weren't expecting people to turn up to events because there were no events to turn up to. So really important in terms of lots of personal advisor type models of activity that helped individual people to address the barriers that they were facing. So interestingly, if I just go back, yeah, I think we've gone too far. No, I haven't. Keeps going back. So just looking at the social value, so we returned just under £3 per pound invested of social value, a total value of £31.8 million, because it was a large programme to start with. But it was interesting when we forecast this programme, and we were very new in kind of doing this kind of activity, we actually forecast a return of around about £6 per pound invested, and we got to about half of that. So whether that was us being terribly over optimistic at the beginning because we didn't quite know, whether it was because of the impact of the COVID pandemic and the fact that activities didn't deliver quite perhaps as they were expecting to, or whether that it was just about our knowledge of how to anticipate and forecast utilising social value techniques. It was interesting that we were some way off, but that's fine. Yeah. So then moving on to a newer programme, I'll do it for East Yorkshire programme, much smaller grants here. So we were talking about community grants of up to £5,000. We did lots of them, so 172 over the last kind of 18 months or so. A lot of them were about kind of reopening high streets and encouraging people back to community events post-COVID, and kind of really getting communities to thrive. And certainly over the winter last year, there was also quite an impact on or a focus on warm and welcoming places at the point when the cost of living and energy bills really started to hit So we're talking about sort of, you know, a smaller program, but a much bigger social value. And it was very interesting, actually, in terms of this program. We did 2 analyses of this, one just around the warm and welcoming places element and one around the whole program. And the social return was actually bigger for the wider program, not the welcoming places stuff. And we think that's because, mainly because people were determining their own solutions to the problems that they were identifying in their communities. So rather than having a specified solution, which was to provide a warm and welcoming place, they could come to us and say, we think by having this event or this activity or having this equipment for our community venue or whatever, that they were able to kind of have more, they were owning their project more than when we were kind of slightly more specific about what was a project. I think that's really important in terms of thinking about how programs are run and how we're operating. And certainly kind of for our next opening of this grant fund, the intention is to keep it wide rather than focusing it in because of that that wider impact. And this was one particular project. Ivan promised angels, here they are. So this was a project that was funded through our local growth programs, and it was around a kind of a Christmas activity in one of our local churches. But it was very successful in terms of bringing people together, lots and lots of volunteer activity, many people coming and participating in community activities, both locally and from further afield. So that gave us a really interesting impact. People were nervous, I think, at the beginning of this particular project in terms of, is this something that we should be investing in? What would be the impact? So we took particular attention in terms of making sure that we'd kind of identified the social return and collected the St Mary's Church volunteers collected the right kind of information, talked to people about why they'd come, had that kind of stakeholder involvement in the impact, so that we could demonstrate that it wasn't just of benefit to the church, but that it was had a much wider impact for the community in terms of the strength of the market town and the activities that were going on. So I'm going to stop there for now, unless anyone wants me to say anything particularly more about any of the activities. If I haven't been kind of detailed enough about exactly what happened, we could go into more detail on one of the projects if you want. But I'll stop for questions. I can see there's some stuff in the chat that I haven't been able to read while I've been chatting.
Claire, there's a question that's coming from Graham Blackett. Does the engine help provide context for what has been forecast or evaluated? From the examples being given, I can see that the value exceeds the cost, but I don't have a feel for whether the numbers are large in the context that the activity is taking place in, i.e., so I don't know whether the value is having a transformational effect on an area or group of beneficiaries, or whether it is marginal.
It's a very good question. Just I think
I can offer a view, Claire.
No, I've got a view. I think it's interesting. It's difficult. So a lot of the 2 funds that I talked about are quite different in that the first one was very targeted on a particularly challenging communities in terms of, if you look at them in terms of index of multiple deprivation. And it's kind of one of those things where we made significant impact for the individuals who participated, and we can demonstrate their progression and the transformational effect for them. But obviously, one of the things that often happens in those kind of communities is that if you raise people's aspirations and you raise their ability to earn income, one of the first things that they might do is move out of the place in which you were targeting, and somebody else will move into a property who perhaps has additional barriers, and you almost start again. So I think it is difficult to absolutely demonstrate, and it's something we kind of focus in on over again. I think in terms of, you focus in on a community, you do lots of activity of this kind, and you don't necessarily see them moving enormously out in their position in terms of something like the index of multiple deprivation, because obviously everybody else is potentially improving also, and you have additional challenges being thrown at people in terms of cost of living crisis, pandemics, whatever else you want to focus on. So it is always hard to demonstrate the transformational nature of things in those communities. I think it is slightly easier in terms of the Do It For East Yorkshire Community Fund, which is much more broadly kind of focused around the entire local authority area, in that you can see kind of wider outcomes in terms of communities, kind of with some pump priming from small funds doing activities, growing in confidence and carrying on those outcomes themselves, that you can see kind of through footfall measures and other things that communities are doing well, or doing better than they were. So I think it partly depends on the type of program that you're managing, and it's why you can never just look at the numbers in terms of, you could get very focused in on the social return element and say, well, this program is better than that program because the social return was higher, but it depends from where you're starting almost in terms of where you get to. So I think, it's part of a suite of measures that help you to demonstrate that there is impact from things that sometimes it's hard to demonstrate impact from, which hopefully give you a compelling narrative to then say to people, this is why we do the things that we do, even if kind of immediately you're not seeing kind of shifts in the deprivation figures, for example.
I thought that was a really good answer. I'm not just saying that because you and I are doing this, but what I was going to say to just really in parallel with what you've said, build on that, is that context is everything. So we use the social return figure not to rank things, but to give a sense of impact. And we quite often work with people in completely different contexts where you will get in a very hard pressed, difficult place. It would take a lot of time and effort to get a high social return. And in other places, you can do that relatively straightforwardly and measure it easier as well because of the capacity of the communities and the people you're working with. But I think what to me is most important is that when you start to use a tool like this, it really causes you to double down on thinking about more than just counting numbers, more than just counting the outputs. We've all been around those programs going back for, in my case, probably decades of, how many businesses have started, how many jobs have you created? Well, actually, that stuff can be quite temporary, and people may remember the New Deal, and the notion of the revolving door, that you might get somebody a job and then you come back in 3 months and they're back in unemployment again. So it's part of providing that really important context for understanding the impact of your actions. And you can only really understand the relativity of it if you read the report as well as look at the ratio. And I think there's another question to build on around that, which is really interesting, which is how often does the projected social value figure greatly differ from the actual social value per pound invested? And I think that can quite often be the case. And the other thing, and I'll bring Claire in on this in a minute, is that social value shouldn't just be measuring things that are good all the time. There are negative unintended consequences, and we also need to build those in our rationale. So I've been recently with Connor working on the evaluation of the sensory bus, which is a fabulous thing. It's a sensory room but on wheels, and for schools that have children with moderate learning difficulties, it's really enhanced the quality of their life. But of course, there's a load of carbon outputs associated with this thing trundling around all these different villages. And so we've had to factor the sort of carbon impacts and also some of the displacement effects on other providers into the analysis. So it's not always just sweetness and light the way we should be thinking about social impact. You know, we do have to measure those negative consequences. And I know there's a big rising of emphasis within the social value community amongst the real aficionados about saying we need to take that more seriously as part and parcel of our process.
And I think just to sort of carry on from that, so yes, that example I gave right at the beginning, we did overestimate. I think it was, you know, a number of factors. I think there are also occasions where people underestimate or find that programs deliver things that were unintended but good. So I know we've done some work with people who were kind of lottery funded, who kind of forecast a set of outcomes at the beginning, were struggling to meet some of those, but could demonstrate that they'd met some other things that actually were potentially even more valuable than the things they thought they were going to do in the first place. So as long as you've got kind of the ability to sort of measure those and to have a dialogue with the commissioners or funders or whoever of what you're delivering, it gives you a narrative and a story to say, well, we didn't quite do this, but we did do this, and we think that's fantastic, and this is why. So I think, you know, having that kind of ability, and as Ivan says, it's the report that goes with the analysis is at least as important, and there is nothing more powerful, I don't think, than having kind of beneficiaries of programs and activities willing to sort of stand up and talk about where they were and where they got to, in terms of sort of telling those tales, in terms of evaluation and activity and stuff. But obviously we focus very much in on kind of this kind of project and program kind of delivery, which is where we started our kind of journey into social value. Obviously other people are trying to demonstrate social value in slightly less easy context. So I think, you know, a lot of people look at social value in the context of procurement because that's where the legislation sits, and it can be harder to think about how you demonstrate and how you measure and how you hold people to account if they've claimed they're going to deliver social value for you through the contracts that you deliver, to make sure that they actually do. So I think it's interesting, the sort of the matrix that Ivan shared earlier in terms of the people who do it as a necessary evil and the people who do it as a passion and a reason to live. You have all of those in every organisation almost. So there will be some people who will be right at the beginning of the journey or further back, and others who've absolutely adopted and worked out how it works in their context. And so the ambition is to bring that through. So I think, you know, Ivan mentioned we've been working together for kind of 10 years plus on this activity. East Riding of Yorkshire Council is only just going through the approval process for its first social value policy. It goes to Cabinet in the middle of November. So it's taken us a long time to get kind of corporate adoption of some of the things that we've been doing on a project and programme basis for some considerable time. And I think that's not to underestimate the work that's needed if you want to kind of adopt this kind of approach and embed it into an organisation.
We increasingly think of different constituencies, and there's a big split, I think, between people who principally use social value assessments around procurement, who need to be quite fleet of foot, quite transactional, and have something that enables them to differentiate between bids and think about impact, and then people who are engaged more in what we've increasingly started to characterize as the wellbeing agenda, and they're people who perhaps might be more focused on managing discretionary spend in local authorities, for example. And I think one of the interesting things that we found when we're working with that wellbeing agenda is that actually thinking about it as an ecosystem and working with your voluntary and community sector partners that are delivering projects makes a big difference. And perhaps I'll just cue Connor in for a second to talk about our experience of working with the Halifax Foundation in Northern Ireland, because we actually took 2 cohorts of 10 quite small organisations in some cases and worked with them to embed the ability to look at the social value they delivered using the tool. And what we actually found was that the principal benefit was it helped them think about project design and delivery. That was the key thing it delivered more than anything else. I don't know if you just wanted to elaborate on that a bit, Connor.
It kind of goes with one of the slides you put up earlier on, Ivan, about the principles of social value, and one of the new ones that was introduced just in the last 12 or 18 months by Social Value UK, which is about being responsive. So we've always been arguing that once you do a social value analysis of your project, or whether it's your organization, that once you have your nice glossy social value report, a nice glossy social value impact card, that should not be the end of the matter. Basically, that doing a social value analysis can be particularly useful for organizations or projects to identify gaps in their data capture, and also as well as helping to measure them, not just intended outcomes that the project was designed to do, but also the unintended outcomes, whether there are spin-offs that may come from the project as a result of doing that, whether there's more work to be done in a particular area or with a particular beneficiary group. So I think with the group of 10 that we've done through Halifax Foundation, which obviously is Lloyd's TSB Foundation based in the wider UK, is that it helped groups to identify, where they're falling down on in terms of whether it's data capture or whether or not it's about maybe potential expansion of services or develop a new service that would be of particular benefit to their beneficiaries.
Mm.
And I think just leading on from that, we've done some work with our local voluntary and community sector through things like community-led local development and more broadly. And what you often find is by helping and supporting people to kind of come on this journey with us and to think about what their impacts are, they find that they're having impact in more domains than they think they are. So a community transport organisation, for example, thinks it has an impact on transport and connectivity. But when you actually kind of look into it, it will actually have an impact across a lot of those other domains, because it's tackling isolation and it's supporting the economy and it's delivering services that weren't there and such like. So it gives people a broader story to tell when they're then looking for kind of sources of funding in the future, that they're not just looking for kind of sets of funding that will fund transport, but they can tell a broader story. I don't want to, there's some more questions coming in.
Yeah, I was just going to get excited about community wealth building.
So was I. So thank you, Sherry, for your question.
Well, if I just say what we've been doing in Scotland and then hand over to you, Maestro, if that's all right. So I don't know if it's Cherry or Cherie. I'm sorry for not being quite clear how to pronounce your first name, but community wealth building is really exciting to us, and it lends itself really well to social impact measurement. And in Scotland, we have a contract with the Scottish government, who bought some licenses on behalf of the local authorities there that are delivering their follow-on programme to Leader. They continued post-Brexit to fund community development in rural areas through a community-led local development programme. And there are 21 local authorities, and they've, rather than having the 400 proxies to choose from, we did some work with them up front to say, what's the theory of change for this programme? Let's identify your key themes. And as you'll know, the Scottish Government has made a formal commitment to community wealth building as one of the core principles around its community agenda. And so we've been working with those 21 local authorities using a series of measures within the engine to look at how they've been getting on against the key themes within the community wealth building agenda, in building the capacity of local people to really have more control over the resources in their localities and to begin to build their own sort of sustainability. So, and there's a report that I can share with you if you want to put your details in the chat, Sherry or Cherry, that I can share with you to show you what we've been doing there. So if you did want to just let me have your contact details, I'll send that on to you, because I think you'd find it particularly interesting. I notice you're in Watford, but you know, it's not that far from Watford to Edinburgh, is it, in relative terms? So, sorry, Claire.
Yeah, no, just to add, so interestingly, our social value team and our community wealth team are in effect kind of combined. We run the two together, which is how closely we kind of see these two things working together. We've got more expertise in social value and we're developing community wealth building activities. But for example, at the moment, the key thing we're looking at is around reshaping the domiciliary care market so that we have more micro local provision of home care and stuff, and are closely looking at the social value that is kind of that comes from those kind of activities if successful. So I think they're part of the same toolkit almost, in terms of delivering sustainable and inclusive economic development. That you need to look at kind of both those things. What's the social value? How can you recirculate as much spend as you can in your local area? It's all part of the same thing.
And I can see a question from what I hope is my old friend Andrew Thurston. It might be another Andrew Thurston, I don't know. But if it is the Andrew Thurston that I know, it's really great to hear from you, Andrew. And those trade-offs are things that so Andrew's asking about trade-offs and whether you can measure those through the engine and look at them, and they absolutely are. You can enter a series of negative and positive values based on those trade-offs into the engine, and it will do the calculations for you, but it will also help you just frame, particularly in the context of some of those sustainability frameworks, the broader context within which those trade-offs are happening. So yeah, it's great to see.
And the other thing I should have mentioned when putting up my slides, that our cumulative social value is all built on the fact that you can measure the impact of individual projects and then pull them all up into a program. So if you've got a project that's looking at kind of the impact of your net zero policy, and you've got a project that's looking at your flexible working, not necessarily in the same people doing the same analysis, but you can then accumulate them up, so you could kind of net off one against the other if that worked for you, and you can cut that in any way that you like across the projects that sit on the engine for your organization. So that would be a good method for looking at those kind of trade-offs potentially.
And then I see there's a question from anonymous attendee. There are several people called that on the call. But which asks, how widely have social value methodologies been adopted across different sectors, and are the approaches to social value streamlined, or do the approaches often vary? I mean, I would say, and I'd be interested to get Connor and Claire's views on this, that there are a range of different methodologies. There is no right way to do this. I mean, there is a government social value model, and you think to yourself, oh, well, that must, come off the fence and definitively say this is the way you must do it. But it doesn't really. It just sets a series of questions you should be asking. It leaves you to work out how to ascribe a value to the answers that you put in there in terms of monetary value and cost. And I think it's quite good that there is a wide constituency of approaches that is available, because what we're trying to do here is find the most appropriate way of measuring impact in terms of one of the most important things in people's life experience. So having one didactical way of doing that probably isn't the best way forward. I dare say if everybody had adopted the social value engine, I might be tempted to say that was the way to do it. But no, being serious, I think that diversity, because more generally, we know that diversity is a good thing. Where it's unhelpful, I think, is where everybody has their own boil in a back room way of trying to suggest they've done something good. So those core principles that are espoused by Social Value International of how you do social value assessments, and particularly having something that is regulated by Chapter 5 of the Green Book and which follows really rigorous and transparent approaches is really important. And there are a number of tools out there that do that, not just the social value engine, but that diversity is a good thing. And then in relation, just very quickly, to different sectors, there are certain sectors, particularly people who are involved in procurement, people who are involved in construction, that have become very heavily involved in this. The big area that I always bang on about, that I think is really important, is wellbeing. Actually, that's not to say we can't do a very good spick and span job with the engine for people who do procurement. We've got 40 odd local authorities that use it for that. But the reason I wanted to play Connor in is that you know, it's a kind of variegated agenda, the engagement by people who do community wellbeing, but we think there's huge scope to do more around that, don't we, Connor?
Very much so, Ivan, and it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about social value being streamlined in terms of its approach, because there's a lot of events like this that we are asking for, that sometimes there does be a kind of call for social value to be standardized in terms of that you can compare apples with apples as such in terms of that. I think that sometimes can defeat the purpose in that as well too, because the various projects or various initiatives that you're measuring social value on are all operating under different contexts and different environments and that as well too. So it kind of be difficult to do that. In terms of the approaches to it, it is really the 8 principles that's advocated by Social Value UK. Essentially, it's about being responsive, getting the involvement of stakeholders in that as well too. And I think some organisations and some bodies are a bit better in getting stakeholders involved in the social value process, as well as asking them direct questions around the impact in that than others. And therefore, I suppose most of us who are in the social value field would try and encourage that whole approach about getting stakeholders really involved in terms of having to determine by impact that an initiative or a project or a service or a facility may be having on their lives, and getting them to have a say in terms of how that's impacted them and others of similar sort of circumstances and that to themselves. There was a conversation a number of years ago in Northern Ireland, particularly around, that was led by the Northern Ireland Executive, around an evaluation framework called outcomes-based accountability, which was the latest trendy evaluation approach that was used in Northern Ireland. It came from, I think it came from a theory that was produced in America. And it was quite expensive for organizations of any size to sort of implement that type of methodology in the work that they do. And our view of that was that basically, you know, it doesn't really matter how groups measure for social value or measure for impact in terms of making sure, but obviously it has to be credible. It's as long as they're doing that as such. And I think that's the key. It's about, you know, trying to do it in a way that it comes with you a robust and credible figure at the end, and that you're happy to stand over whatever the findings that you have with that, and are able to draw conclusions in terms of determining what your next stages of your social value analysis or your work is going to be going forward.
Excellent. Well, I think, because we always like to give something back, we may have exhausted you.
There's one more question.
Connor, fire away.
There's one more question that's come in from the live chat. And basically what it is, it's come from David Wright. And it's about, is it fair to say that the tool has usually demonstrated outcomes which you or delivery partners knew but weren't previously available to evidence?
Well, I Claire, what do you think?
I think we always knew the impact was there for evidence, but we didn't always have a mechanism for doing it other than through kind of case studies, which can be very powerful. And you'd always want to see those in somewhere, but in terms of having a way of getting buy-in from people who've always maybe been more skeptical about our pink and fluffy outcomes, it's a very useful way of adding some rigor to the activity that helps people. A lot of people aren't wild about the fact that we talk in terms of a return on investment, in terms of kind of pounds, because it's not real money and it never would be. But I think it has helped really kind of take the dialogue forward, because people have been willing to kind of participate in that dialogue because they understand pounds, and therefore will take more seriously the impacts that are being evidenced through the methodology. That's my view.
Yeah, well, I think that summarises exactly what I would say, which shows we've been working together for 10 years, doesn't it? But I think, unless there's anything else, I'm going to suggest we give people 9 or 8 minutes back. Before I do that, I'd like to just thank Nigel very much indeed. I mean, he's been a silent factor here. He's been the quiet, silent one, just as a bit of piped writing. But also Sarah Lynn as well, who those of you who are close to the Institute will know, but she's done all the hard work to make this fit together, and it's been a triumph in terms of the way it's all worked, even though I dropped out and then had to get back in again. But that's down to me, nothing to do with the way that this has all been set up. So if I could, on behalf of the social value team, thank Nigel and the IED very much. And we are going to be at the, as Claire said, at the conference next week, and we'll be in the bar and we'll be in the meal. So if you'd like to continue this conversation, any of you that are going to that, please do. And if you'd just like to know a bit more, I'll share the report with Sherry and Morag that I mentioned. We'll get the slides out to you all, but if there's any more or anything else you'd like, just feel free to drop us an email, and we'll pick up on where we are on this social value journey with you. But if I could just thank you very much indeed for coming. I don't know if you wanted to say any very final words, Nigel, but I think we'll sign off.
Only to thank you both, Ivan and Claire, and the team. We're grateful for your participation in the IED, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So I enjoyed the session. I got plenty out of it too. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, Claire will buy you a drink on Tuesday next then. Cheers.
Excellent.
Okay, everyone.
Just stuff my wallet.
Thanks very much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.